The path revealed itself not as a straight line, but as a gentle, meandering suggestion whispered into the landscape. It was a ribbon of beaten earth, the color of pale honey, winding its way through hills that rolled and folded into one another, like soft, sleeping green animals. The air itself was a presence, a cool and cleansing wash against the skin, carrying with it the unmistakable, briny temps of the sea and the damp, clean scent of earth that had recently known rain. A fine mist, more an ethereal breath than a true fog, clung to the hollows of the land, blurring the horizon and softening the edges of the world, creating a sense of quiet and deliberate isolation. With every step, the sounds of the distant world, the hum of unseen roads, the hurried pace of life left far behind, faded into a profound and welcome silence, replaced by a new orchestra of quietude. There was the whisper of the wind as it moved through the coarse blades of dune grass, a sound like a long, slow exhalation. Far away, almost too faint to be certain, came the lonely, melancholic cry of a gull, a single piercing note that only served to deepen the surrounding peace. Each footfall on the soft earth was a muffled rhythmic beat, a gentle percussion marking a slow and mindful journey, not just through space, but away from time itself. The world here seemed to operate on a different clock, one measured in the slow drift of clouds and the patient turning of the tide. As the path curved one final time, dipping into a shallow vale that seemed to cradle and protect whatever lay within, the cottage began to materialize from the silver-white veil of mist. It did not appear all at once, but rather emerged piece by piece, a gradual revelation that felt both magical and entirely natural. First, the dark, stooped line of the roof, a thick and textured cap of thatch that seemed to have grown from the hill itself, its edges softened by time and weather. Then, the sturdy, reassuring shapes of stone walls, their surfaces a mosaic of gray and ochre and mossy green, glowing with a subtle warmth even in the diffused light of the afternoon. A plume of smoke, impossibly white against the pale sky, rose from a squat stone chimney, not in a straight, urgent line, but in a lazy, whimsical spiral, a soft, slow-moving curl that spoke of a fire lit not for desperate warmth, but for simple, quiet comfort. It was a signal, a gentle beckoning, an assurance that a hearth was waiting. The entire structure felt less like it had been built upon the land and more like it had been allowed to grow there, a natural and ancient feature of the coastline, as much a part of the scenery as the hardy gorse and the resilient, wind-sculpted trees. It was a place that did not impose itself, but instead offered a quiet invitation, a promise of sanctuary from the bluster of the outside world. The path ended at a small wooden gate, so weathered and silvered by the salt-laced air that it seemed to blend into the landscape. It stood slightly ajar, a silent welcome. Pausing there, hand resting on the smooth, cool wood of the top rail, allowed for a moment of pure, uninterrupted observation. From this vantage point, the cottage presented itself in its full and unassuming charm. The thatched roof was a masterpiece of rustic artistry, a dense and intricate weave of straw that swept down low over the walls, almost like a heavy, protective brow. Rain and wind and sun had sculpted it over countless seasons, creating gentle dips and soft rises, its surface alive with subtle shifts in color, from pale gold to deep, earthy brown. Nestled within the thick stone walls were small windows, their frames painted a faded gentle red, the color of late summer roses or the inside of a seashell. These were the cottage's eyes, looking out with a placid, sleepy gaze toward the sea. The chimney continued its steady, peaceful exhalation, the scent of burning applewood, now a faint sweet perfume on the breeze. The entire scene was one of profound and settled peace, a portrait of endurance and quiet beauty. It was a place that had stood for a long, long time, a silent witness to the endless rhythm of the waves and the changing of the seasons, its stones holding the memory of 100,000 peaceful days. Crossing the threshold of the little gate felt like stepping into a hidden garden, a secret world unto itself. A short path of smooth, gray flagstones, worn down by generations of footsteps, led the way to the front door. The stones were not set in a rigid, formal pattern, but laid in a way that followed the natural contour of the ground, their edges softened by clumps of vibrant green moss, and the determined blossoms of tiny wildflowers. Small, Star-like flowers of a brilliant blue and the delicate white heads of clover pushed their way up through the cracks, a testament to the gentle tenacity of life in this quiet corner of the world. The air within the low stone walls of the garden was stiller, more sheltered, and carried a different fragrance, the sweet, peppery scent of unseen roses, and the clean, herbal aroma of lavender. The front door stood at the end of the path, a solid and welcoming presence. It was made of thick planks of dark, heavy wood, the grain raised and deepened by time into a landscape of ridges and valleys. There was no paint, only the natural, rich color of the aged timber, polished to a low sheen by the hands that had opened and closed it over the years. A simple ring of black iron served as the handle, cool and solid to the touch, a promise of the sturdiness and simplicity that lay within. Reaching out, my fingers curled around the cold, smooth weight of the iron ring. For a heartbeat, there was only stillness. The gentle hum of a bee, investigating a nearby bloom, and the distant, sighing rush of the surf. The world seemed to hold its breath in that small moment of anticipation. A gentle pull, a slight resistance, and then the door swung inward with a quiet, well-oiled groan, a sound of welcome rather than complaint. And then, the transition, a complete and instantaneous shift in sensory experience. The cool, salt-tinged air of the coast was immediately replaced by an enveloping blanket of warmth that seemed to radiate from the very heart of the cottage. It was a deep, penetrating warmth, not the dry, artificial heat of a modern system, but the living, breathing heat of a wood fire. It wrapped around me like a soft woolen shawl, chasing away the last of the afternoon's chill and soothing muscles I hadn't even realized were tense. The light inside was dim and golden, a stark contrast to the pale, silvery light of the misty day. It was a light that did not seek to expose, but to comfort, to create soft shadows and gentle, glowing pools of amber and honey. This wave of warmth was followed by a rich and complex tapestry of scent, an aroma so deeply and wonderfully evocative of comfort that it felt like a memory I had always known. The most prominent note was the sweet, tangy fragrance of hot apple cider, spiced with a hint of cinnamon and clove, a scent that spoke of autumn harvests and cozy evenings. Woven through this was the dry, aromatic perfume of burning applewood, a clean, slightly smoky fragrance that was the very essence of a welcoming hearth. Deeper still, beneath these immediate layers, were the more subtle, foundational scents of the cottage itself. The faint beeswax polish on old wood, the dry, papery smell of aging books, and a barely there hint of dried lavender, a clean, calming presence in the air. These were the scents of a home that was loved and lived in, a place of simple, wholesome routines and quiet, contented moments. It was an aroma that did not just enter the lungs, but seemed to settle deep within the soul, untying knots of worry and whispering a profound and gentle message of peace and of safety. And then, there was the sound. The silence of the sheltered garden was replaced by the cottage's own gentle music, a soft and constant symphony that was immediately calming. The lead instrument was the fire, burning brightly in a large stone fireplace just visible from the doorway. It was a living sound, a cheerful and continuous crackle and hiss as the sap in the logs vaporized, punctuated by the occasional soft pop and the gentle, whispering sigh of embers settling into a glowing bed. This was the heartbeat of the house, a steady, rhythmic, and deeply reassuring sound. It spoke of warmth, of light, and of a central, grounding presence that held the quiet of the house around it. There was no other sound, no ticking clock, no hum of electricity, just the gentle, timeless song of the fire. The world outside, with its wind and its vast open spaces, felt a million miles away. Here, within these four walls, was a complete and self-contained universe of warmth, comfort, and profound, undisturbed tranquility. Closing the heavy wooden door, the latch clicked into place with a solid, satisfying finality, a sound that severed the last thin thread connecting this small haven to the world left behind. Sealing the quiet, and the peace was absolute. The air, thick with warmth and the scent of welcome, held me just inside the door, a gentle and insistent presence. For a long moment, there was no movement, only the quiet act of standing, of allowing the transition to complete itself. The body was still clad in the uniform of the outside world, a traveler who had reached a destination but had not yet truly arrived. The heavy coat, its fabric still cool and faintly damp from the coastal mist, felt like a shell, a protective but now unnecessary barrier. The woolen scarf, wrapped snugly around my neck, carried the last lingering scent of the sharp, salty air, a final fading whisper of the journey now past. My very posture was that of one who had been walking against the wind, a subtle, unconscious bracing of the shoulders, a tension held deep within the muscles. The world of the cottage and the world of the journey were coexisting in this small space, one held in the warm air and the soft light, the other carried in the clothes upon my back. A decision formed, not as a thought, but as a quiet, physical imperative. The shedding must begin. The world outside had to be folded away, piece by piece, until only the quiet contentment of the here and now remained. My hands, feeling slow and somehow distant, rose to the task. The fingertips, still cool from their exposure to the elements, met the familiar, coarse texture of the woolen scarf. The wool was not wet, but it held a certain humidity. A dense and cool dampness, absorbed from the misty air, a captured piece of the weather of the day. The act of unwinding it was slow, a deliberate and mindful rotation. With each pass, a layer of constriction fell away. The scarf had been a necessary comfort against the persistent sea breeze, a shield against the chill, but here, in the gentle fire-warmed air, it was a restraint. The motion was rhythmic, circular, my hands tracing the path they had taken hours before in reverse. The fabric whispered as it slid against itself, a soft, fibrous sound that was absorbed almost immediately by the profound quiet of the room. The world seemed to shrink to this single, focused action. The slow, methodical unwrapping, the gradual loosening, the patient unburdening of a weight I had not fully been aware I was carrying until this very moment of its release. With the final loop, the scarf came free, and the sensation was one of pure, unadulterated release. The warm air of the cottage, which had until then only been a general, enveloping presence, rushed in to touch the bare skin of my neck. It felt impossibly soft, a caress of pure comfort that seemed to travel instantly down my spine, dissolving the last vestiges of tension held there. A sigh escaped my lips, an unconscious and wholly involuntary sound of relief. The scarf, now held loosely in my hands, felt surprisingly heavy, a dense coil of damp wool. Its purpose served. I folded it once, then twice, the movements careful and reverent, as if putting away a cherished tool. A row of simple, dark wooden pegs protruded from the wall beside the door, their surfaces worn smooth by long use. I reached out and hung the scarf on one of them, where it drooped a soft, dark shape against the pale plaster wall, its journey over. It was the first piece of the outside world to be relinquished, the first step in the ritual of arrival, a small but deeply significant act of surrender to the sanctuary of the cottage. Next came the coat. It was a heavy garment, made for walking in uncertain weather, and its weight on my shoulders felt more pronounced than ever. My fingers found the first button, a smooth, cool disc of polished horn. The process of unfastening it was as deliberate as the unwrapping of the scarf. One by one, the buttons slid free from their stiffly woven buttonholes, each release accompanied by a faint, satisfying pop. The front of the coat fell open, and the warmth of the room intensified its embrace, no longer held at bay by the thick fabric. A deep breath filled my lungs, an inhalation not just of air, but of the layered, comforting scents of apple cider and wood smoke, now more potent, more immediate. I shifted my shoulders, first one, then the other, and the coat began to slide back. The sheer physical relief of shedding its weight was immense. A feeling of being set free, of lightness and unrestricted movement returning to my limbs. The garment slid down my arms and I caught it, its heaviness now contained in my hands. I folded it carefully, the way one might fold a heavy blanket, and placed it over a sturdy wooden chest that sat against the wall, its dark wood glowing in the firelight. The act was final. The armor was off. My attention then drifted downward, to my feet, still encased in the heavy, mud-flecked boots that had carried me here. They felt clumsy and loud in the quiet of the room, a stark reminder of the rough path, of the miles of earth and stone now left behind. They were symbols of the journey, and to be truly at rest, they too had to be relinquished. A small, low bench, crafted from the same dark, honest wood as the chest, sat near the door, its purpose unspoken but obvious. Sinking onto its surface, I felt the satisfying solidity of the wood beneath me, a small island of support. The floorboards stretched out before me, their surfaces uneven and worn smooth in pathways traced by years of quiet domestic life. The planks were wide and dark, and the warm golden light of the fire danced across them, illuminating the deep grain, the occasional knot, the subtle patina of age. The warmth of the room had seeped into the very wood itself, and I could feel a gentle heat radiating upwards, a promise of the comfort to come. Leaning forward, I began the patient work of unlacing the boots. My fingers, now fully warmed, moved with a newfound nimbleness, pulling at the thick, sturdy laces, freeing them from the metal eyelets one by one. The sound was small, but distinct in the quiet room, a soft, rhythmic friction of fabric against metal. There was no rush. This was not a task to be hurried, but another step in the slow unfolding ritual of settling in. Each tug that loosened the intricate network of the laces was another knot of tension being undone. With the laces finally free, I grasped the heel of the first boot and pulled. It came away with a soft, sighing sound, and the sense of release was immediate and profound. My foot, enclosed only in a thick wool sock, was suddenly free from the rigid leather that had held it for so long. The feeling of liberation was so intense, it was almost startling. I set the boot down gently on the stone hearth to dry, its dark, earthy shape looking strangely inert and sculptural in the flickering light of the fire. I repeated the process with the other boot, just as slowly, just as mindfully, until it too was placed beside its partner, two silent, empty vessels standing guard by the fire. And then, the final, glorious sensation of arrival. I flexed my toes, still enclosed in their soft woolen cocoons, and lowered my feet to the floor. The moment they made contact with the old wooden planks was a moment of pure, grounding bliss. The wood was not just warm. It felt alive, its surface smooth and slightly yielding beneath the soft wool of my socks. A deep, gentle heat radiated up, a steady and profoundly comforting energy that seemed to travel from the soles of my feet all the way through my body. It was a feeling of being anchored, of being physically and spiritually connected to the very foundation of this peaceful place. I pressed my feet against the floor, feeling the solid, reassuring strength of the house beneath me, a house that had stood for generations, offering this same simple, profound comfort to all who had crossed its threshold. It was a sensation of being truly and completely home, not just within the walls of the cottage, but within myself. The journey was over. The restlessness had ceased. I had arrived. Rising from the bench, I felt a new sense of lightness, a feeling of being unburdened and at ease in my own skin. My eyes scanned the room, truly taking in the details for the first time, and fell upon a large, comfortable-looking armchair near the fire. It was upholstered in a faded floral fabric, its colors softened by time into a gentle tapestry of mossy greens and pale roses. Draped over the back of the chair was a thick, woolen blanket. It was a simple thing, woven from a soft heather gray yarn, its edges finished with a fringe that was slightly and charmingly frayed. It was not a decorative object, but a thing of purpose, an invitation to comfort. It seemed to beckon, to promise another, deeper layer of warmth and solace. I moved towards it, my socked feet making no sound on the wooden floor, the silence of my own movements adding to the deep peace of the room. My hand reached out, and my fingers made contact with the blanket. The texture was exactly as I had imagined, soft, but with the slight, honest coarseness of real wool. It was thick and heavy, promising substantial warmth. As I lifted it from the back of the chair, it unfolded in a slow, gentle cascade, its weight a comforting presence in my hands. It was not the oppressive weight of the damp outdoor coat, but a grounding, reassuring heaviness, the weight of pure comfort. I brought a corner of the fabric to my face and inhaled. It held the faintest scent of the cottage itself, a hint of wood smoke, and the clean, dry smell of old wood, a fragrance that was both calming and deeply familiar, as if from a half-remembered dream. Holding it felt like holding a promise, a tangible piece of the peace that permeated every corner of this small, secluded haven. With a slow and fluid motion, I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders. It settled around me like a gentle, loving embrace, its soft weight, a constant reassuring pressure. The transformation was complete. The last vestiges of the traveler had been shed, replaced by the quiet contentment of the resident. I was no longer a visitor who had just arrived, but a part of the cottage's quiet life, wrapped in its warmth, breathing its peaceful air. I turned towards the fireplace, the heart of the cottage, drawn by the mesmerizing silent dance of the flames. The blanket trailed slightly behind me, a soft gray cloak of comfort, as I moved closer to the source of the warmth and the light, ready to finally be still. The fire crackled softly, a sound of welcome, as the flames leaped and swayed, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow on the old stone walls. Writing a silent, flickering poem of welcome and of peace. Standing on the warm stone of the hearth, I felt the full force of the fire's heat on my face and hands. It was a clean, penetrating warmth that seemed to sink deep into my bones, chasing away any lingering chill. The flames were a living entity, a constant, silent, and beautiful dance of orange and gold and crimson. They writhed and curled around the logs, consuming them with a gentle, persistent hunger, transforming solid wood into light and heat and a fine gray ash. I watched, mesmerized by the endless, shifting patterns, the way a tongue of pure gold would suddenly leap high, only to dissolve into a shower of incandescent sparks that spiraled up the chimney and disappeared into the night. The sound was a soft, continuous whisper, a language of pure comfort, punctuated by the occasional sharp crackle as a pocket of sap burst within a log. It was a sound as old as time, a lullaby of safety and security that spoke directly to some ancient primal part of the soul. I took a deep breath, a slow, deliberate inhalation that filled my lungs to their very depths. The air was a complex and wonderful perfume, a rich blend of the sharp, clean scent of the burning apple wood, the sweet, spicy aroma of the cider gently warming somewhere in the room, and the underlying foundational scent of the house itself, the faint, pleasant dustiness of old books, the beeswax polish on the furniture, the clean, dry scent of the woolen blanket around my shoulders. I held the breath for a long, silent moment, letting the warmth and the peace of the place fill me completely, allowing it to permeate every cell. It felt like I was drinking in the very essence of tranquility, absorbing the deep, unshakable calm of the cottage. And then, with the same slow deliberation, I exhaled. The breath left my body in a long, quiet sigh, and with it went everything else. With it went the memory of the wind on the hills, the feeling of the cold mist on my skin, the lingering thoughts of the world left far behind, the tension in my shoulders, the weariness in my limbs, the quiet hum of anxiety that so often lives unnoticed in the background of a busy mind. It all dissolved, carried away on that single, long exhalation. My shoulders dropped a final, infinitesimal fraction of an inch. My mind, which had been gently unwinding since I first opened the cottage door, finally came to a complete and utter rest. There was no past, no future, only the profound and simple reality of this moment, the warmth of the fire, the weight of the blanket, the steady rhythmic beating of my own calm heart. I had not just entered a house, I had entered a state of grace. I was here, I was still, and I was at peace, wrapped in the soft, heavy embrace of the woolen blanket. I turned away from the immediate, living comfort of the fire to truly see the space I now inhabited. The room was not large, but it possessed a depth and character that made its physical dimensions feel irrelevant. The ceiling was low, so low that a tall person might feel the need to stoop. But instead of feeling oppressive, it created a profound sense of intimacy and shelter, as if I were nestled safely in a burrow or a den. Great dark beams of wood, almost black with age and soot, stretched across the ceiling, their surfaces rough-hewn and bearing the marks of the adze that had shaped them centuries ago. They were not perfectly straight, but possessed a slight organic curve, following the natural line of the trees from which they had been cut. Their solidity was a silent testament to the cottage's endurance, a foundational strength that was both seen and felt. The firelight, the room's primary source of illumination, danced and leaped across these beams, casting deep, soft shadows that shifted and swayed in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, making the very structure of the house feel as though it were gently breathing. The walls were a simple, honest plaster, their surfaces uneven and undulating, showing the human hand that had applied the material long ago. They were not a sterile, perfect white, but a warm, creamy off-white, a color that seemed to have absorbed the golden glow of 1,000 fires. The flickering light from the hearth washed over these textured surfaces, catching on the subtle imperfections, the small bumps and shallow valleys, creating a constantly moving tapestry of light and shade. This gentle living light softened every corner and every edge, preventing the room from ever feeling stark or empty. It was a space that felt ancient, not in a way that was neglected or decayed, in a way that was deeply and lovingly maintained. Every surface, from the dark wood of the ceiling beams to the worn wide planks of the floor, seemed to glow with a low internal luster, the result of countless years of quiet care, of being swept and polished and simply lived in. The air itself seemed thick with this history of peace, a palpable sense of the quiet, contented lives that had unfolded within these walls. It was a room that did not just provide shelter, but actively seemed to offer solace. My gaze, having taken in the whole, was inevitably drawn to the wall opposite the fireplace. It was a wall made not of stone or plaster, but of books. From the warm wooden floor to the dark-beamed ceiling, shelves crammed with books of every shape and size created a rich, textured mosaic of color and form. It was not a neat, curated library, but the glorious, chaotic collection of a true and passionate reader. Spines of dark, polished leather stood next to humble, cloth-bound volumes in faded shades of green and blue and burgundy. Thick, scholarly tomes were wedged beside slim collections of poetry. There was no discernible order, no alphabetical or categorical arrangement, only the sense of a collection that had grown organically over many, many years, each book added as it was found and loved. The firelight played across the spines, glinting off the occasional line of faded gold leaf lettering, making a title or an author's name momentarily shine forth from the shadows before receding again into comfortable obscurity. The sheer presence of so many stories, so many worlds and voices and lifetimes gathered together in one place, was almost overwhelming. It was a silent congregation, a chorus of sleeping thoughts and dreams, and the room felt fuller and warmer for their presence. Moving towards this wall of stories felt like approaching a sacred place. My socked feet made no sound on the floorboards, a silence that felt appropriate, a sign of respect for the deep quiet that resided among the books. As I drew closer, a new scent began to distinguish itself from the dominant aromas of smoke and cider. It was a smell that was subtle but unmistakable, the unique and deeply comforting perfume of old books. It was a dry, slightly sweet scent, a complex blend of aging paper, brittle glue, and the faint, dusty vanilla notes of decaying lignin. Woven through it was the rich, animal scent of old leather bindings, and the fainter, cleaner smell of beeswax, likely used to polish the wooden shelves. I took a deep breath, inhaling this fragrance of stored time and quiet knowledge. It was a scent that spoke of slow, rainy afternoons, of turning pages by candlelight, of being utterly lost and happily found within the pages of a story. It was the smell of sanctuary, the aroma of 1,000 peaceful hours. I stopped directly before the shelves, so close that I could feel the faint, still coolness of the air that hung around the books. A pocket of tranquility, untouched by the direct heat of the fire. My eyes scanned the titles, but I was not trying to read them. Instead, I was simply observing them as objects, as vessels of time and care. I could see the way the top edges of the books were softened with a fine layer of dust, a testament to their long and peaceful rest. I could see the subtle variations in the texture of the bindings, the smooth, almost slick surface of a well-cared-for leather spine, the rougher, more open weave of a linen cover. Some books stood tall and straight, while others leaned tiredly against their neighbors. Their spines canted at a gentle angle, as if in conversation. The collection was not an exhibit. It was a community, each volume with its own history, its own personality, its own place in the larger whole. The sheer silent weight of all that accumulated knowledge, all those imagined worlds, was a profoundly humbling and deeply comforting presence. A quiet impulse, born of a desire for a more tangible connection, guided my hand. I reached out, my fingers extended, hesitating for a fraction of a second before making contact. The world seemed to pause in that small gap of air in anticipation. My mind was empty of all thought, focused entirely on the simple, imminent act of touch. It was a gesture of greeting, of acknowledging the silent, sleeping stories that waited here. It felt less like an action I was choosing to take, and more like a response to an invitation I had only just now understood. The books were not just there to be looked at. They were there to be felt, to be known, not just by the mind, but by the hand. My breath caught in my throat, a small silent hitch and the quiet rhythm of my breathing, as I prepared to bridge that final small distance and make a connection with the history that lined these shelves. My fingertips finally made contact with the row of spines, and a small, tactile shock of pleasure traveled up my arm. The sensation was wonderful, a journey across a varied and fascinating landscape. I began to slide my hands slowly along the shelf, a gentle, sweeping caress. The first spine was leather, its surface cool and incredibly smooth, like touching a polished river stone. The next was cloth, its texture a rough, honest weave, the fibers distinct beneath my skin. Another was ridged, the raised bands of the binding, creating a gentle, rhythmic series of bumps. My fingers traced the embossed, gilded letters of a title, the shapes no longer words to be read, but a topography to be explored. The sensation was grounding, a direct and intimate communion with these objects. These containers of human thought and imagination. It was a way of reading without opening a single page, of absorbing the essence of the library through the simple, mindful act of touch. As my hand continued its slow journey, it stirred the still air, releasing a more concentrated cloud of that wonderful, dusty paper-scented air. The fragrance billowed up, and I inhaled it deeply. A perfume that seemed to bypass the lungs and travel directly to some old, quiet part of the soul. The faint friction of my fingers against the spines created the only sound, a soft whispering, shushing noise, as if the books themselves were murmuring in their sleep. It was a sound that belonged here, a sound that only deepened the profound quiet of the room. This simple, physical connection felt like a confirmation of what I had felt upon first entering the cottage. That this was a place of deep and abiding peace, a place where time slowed down, where the simple act of touching a row of old books could feel as significant and as fulfilling as any grand adventure. I was not just in a room with books. I was in the company of friends. Eventually, I let my hand fall back to my side, the soft wool of the blanket a familiar comfort. A different quality of light, separate from the fire's warm glow, drew my attention. In the far corner of the room, a tall, narrow window was set deep into the stone wall, and through it, the pale, fading light of the late afternoon was filtering. I felt a gentle pull towards it, a desire to see the world outside from the safety of this warm refuge. I moved across the room, my passage marked by the shifting patterns of firelight on the floorboards around me. The window was dressed with a simple curtain of delicate cream-colored lace, its pattern intricate and fine, a web of spinning flowers and trailing vines. It was a fragile, beautiful thing, a soft and feminine touch in the otherwise rustic and sturdy room. I reached out, not to pull the curtain aside, but simply to touch it. My fingers brushed against the fabric, and the texture was even more delicate than it appeared. A soft, complex network of fine threads, surprisingly strong for all its seeming fragility. The light of the dying day passed through the intricate holes in the lace, projecting a soft, ghostly image of the floral pattern onto the deep wooden windowsill and the floor beyond. It was a beautiful, transient piece of art, a collaboration between the craft of the curtain maker and the slow, inexorable turning of the earth. The light itself was a gentle, melancholy gray-blue, the color of twilight, a stark and lovely contrast to the warm, golden-orange light that filled the rest of the room. Looking through the lace was like looking through a soft focus lens. The view outside blurred and dreamlike, its edges softened into a beautiful, impressionistic painting. Peering more closely through the veil of lace, I could see the view that the cottage watched over. The green rolling hills sloped gently down towards a line of darker, sharper cliffs, and beyond them, stretching out to the horizon, was the sea. It was not the bright, sparkling blue of a summer's day, but a deep, moody slate gray, its surface moving in a slow, hypnotic swell. The mist had begun to lift, but the air was still thick with a hazy, diffused light, and the horizon where the sea met the sky was a soft, indistinct blur. There were no boats, no signs of life, only the vast, empty, and beautiful expanse of water and sky. The view was one of wildness and solitude, but seen from here, from the warmth and safety of the cottage, it was not intimidating. It was profoundly peaceful. The contrast was everything. The wild, untamed beauty of the natural world outside, and the small, warm, human-made sanctuary within. It was a perfect, harmonious balance, and standing there, I felt as if I were positioned at the very fulcrum of that balance, a quiet observer of two different kinds of peace. A sudden, particularly sweet wave of fragrance broke my reverie, pulling my attention back from the window and into the heart of the room once more. It was the scent of baked apples and warm spices, now stronger and more insistent than before. It was the aroma that had greeted me at the door, but now it had a clear direction, a source. I followed it with my nose, my gaze tracing a path back towards the great stone fireplace. There, nestled on the hearthstones at the very edge of the fire's reach, sat a small, black pot made of heavy cast iron. It was a simple, unassuming object, its surface dark and matte, but from it rose a thin, steady plume of fragrant steam, which caught the firelight and glowed for a moment before dissolving into the warm air. Drawn by a gentle curiosity, I knelt on the warm hearth, the heat of the stones seeping through the wool of my socks. I peered into the pot. The source of the wonderful smell was a dark, amber-colored liquid, bubbling with a slow, gentle, almost lazy rhythm. A single stick of cinnamon and a few dark star-shaped cloves bobbed on the surface of the simmering apple cider. It was the very picture of simple, rustic comfort, a drink being warmed not in a hurry, but with a slow, patient intention. The sound it made was a soft, contented murmur, a sound that harmonized perfectly with the crackle of the logs. Watching the steam rise, carrying with it the scent of pure, unadulterated coziness, I felt a wave of profound gratitude wash over me. This was not just a house. It was a home that was actively, in this very moment, creating comfort. The fire, the books, the blanket, and now it was all a part of a deep and abiding welcome, a quiet, insistent message that I was safe, that I was cared for, and that I had, at long last, found my way to a place of perfect and complete repose. The observation was complete, a slow and thorough absorption of the room's gentle character. Kneeling on the warm hearthstones, the world had been reduced to the small, dark pot of cider, the hypnotic dance of the fire, and the comforting weight of the blanket. A deep sense of peace had settled, a passive and receptive state of being. But now, a subtle shift was occurring. A quiet and natural evolution from simply being in the space to wanting to participate with it. The fragrant steam rising from the cider was no longer just a pleasant aroma filling the air. It became a direct and personal invitation. The soft, bubbling sound was not just part of the room's ambient music. It was a gentle, insistent suggestion. A quiet, formless desire began to crystallize in my mind, taking shape not as a series of logical thoughts, but as a simple, undeniable impulse. It was the desire to taste the warmth, to take that external comfort and make it internal, to complete the circle of welcome that the cottage had so generously offered. The decision was made without a single word forming in my head. It was a physical and instinctual resolution, a turning from passive observer to gentle participant. The time for simply watching was over. It was time to partake in the quiet ritual that was unfolding by the fire. With this new, gentle purpose animating my limbs, I began to move. The motion was slow, a deliberate unfolding from my kneeling position on the hearth. One hand pressed against the warm stone for balance, the other ensuring the woolen blanket remained securely draped over my shoulders. I rose to my feet with a sense of quiet determination, the soft fabric of the blanket whispering with the movement. The fire bathed me in its warm orange light, and for a moment, I was a silhouette against its glow. My focus, which had been diffused, taking in the entire room, now narrowed. A new question had entered the quiet landscape of my mind. Where would one find a vessel in such a place? My eyes began a slow, methodical scan of the room, looking past the obvious comforts of the armchair and the silent society of the books. I was searching for a sign of domesticity, for the humble, hidden corners where the tools for living were kept. My gaze swept over the textured plaster walls, the dark, solid furniture, and finally settled on a small, unassuming cabinet tucked into an alcove beside the towering bookshelves. It was made of the same dark, honest wood as the other pieces in the room, its surface glowing with a low, soft sheen in the firelight. A simple, hand-wrought iron latch, shaped like a small, flat leaf, held its single door closed. It was a quiet and unassuming piece of furniture, and yet, I felt an intuitive certainty that my search was over. Moving towards it, each step was soft and soundless on the old floorboards. The journey was only a few feet, but it felt like a significant passage, a deliberate movement from the hearth, the heart of the cottage, towards one of its secrets. I stopped before the cabinet, its surface at waist height, and a new layer of scent reached me, the faint, clean aroma of beeswax, used to polish and protect the wood. For a moment, I simply rested my hand on its surface. The wood was cool, a distinct contrast to the warmth of the hearth, and incredibly smooth, the grain, a subtle, flowing texture beneath my palm. It felt solid, dependable, a keeper of simple treasures. My fingers then moved to the iron latch. It too was cool, and its surface was not perfectly smooth, but held the faint, hammered texture of the blacksmith's art. There was a pleasing weight and solidity to it. Lifting the leaf-shaped latch required a gentle pressure, and it moved with a soft, metallic click, a small, sharp sound that seemed to punctuate the room's deep silence. The sound was a key turning in a lock, an announcement of a small discovery about to be made. With the latch freed, I curled my fingers around the edge of the door and pulled it open. It swung outward without a sound, a testament to the care with which its hinges had been kept. The air that drifted out from the cabinet's interior was cool and dry, carrying the clean woody scent of aged timber that has been kept closed for a long time. My eyes adjusted to the shadowed space within, and a soft internal smile of satisfaction blossomed within me. There, nestled on a single wooden shelf, was a small, eclectic family of ceramic mugs. They were not a matched set, not a uniform collection bought from a store, but a gathering of unique, individual pieces, each with its own distinct character. There were perhaps half a dozen of them in total, standing in a slightly uneven, friendly line. One was a pale, creamy white, its shape plump and generous. Another was a simple, earthy terracotta, its surface unglazed and slightly rough. A third was a cheerful, sky blue, its surface glossy and bright, even in the dim light. They were all clearly handmade, their shapes bearing the subtle, beautiful imperfections of the potter's wheel, a slight wobble in a rim, a gentle curve where a straight line might have been intended. They were objects made not by machines, but by hands, and they radiated a quiet, humble beauty. My own hand, which had just opened the door, now moved into the cool, dark space of the cabinet. My fingers hovered for a moment, a brief, silent deliberation, in the face of a simple but somehow important choice. Which one? Which of these quiet waiting vessels was the right one for this moment? My gaze drifted from one to the next, considering each in turn. The cheerful blue felt too bright for the deep, contemplative peace of the evening. The earthy terracotta, while beautiful, seemed too rustic, too raw. My fingers drifted past them, a slow, gentle procession, until they came to rest on a mug tucked slightly behind the others. I knew, with a certainty that required no logical explanation, that this was the one. It felt like a quiet recognition, as if the mug itself had been waiting for my hand to find it. It was a recognition not of the mind, but of the senses, a deep, intuitive rightness that settled the matter without any need for further thought. My fingers closed around it, and the connection was immediate and satisfying. I lifted it from the shelf, bringing it out of the shadows of the cabinet and into the warm, flickering firelight. The mug was heavier than I had expected, a solid, reassuring weight that filled my palm. It was a deep, forest green, a color that reminded me of moss on old stones and the shadowy depths of a pine wood. The glaze was not uniform, but a living, shifting landscape of color. Darker, almost black, streaks ran through the green, and around the rim. The glaze thinned to reveal a hint of the pale, underlying clay. Near the handle, a single, accidental drip of a different glaze, a brilliant, cobalt blue, had been frozen in place by the heat of the kiln, a small, perfect teardrop of color that made the mug utterly and uniquely itself. The surface was not perfectly smooth but had a subtle texture, a series of faint concentric rings left by the potter's fingers as they had drawn the clay upwards on the wheel. It was a story told in texture, a record of its own creation. I turned the mug over in my hands, a slow and careful examination. The handle was thick and sturdy, fitting my fingers perfectly, a comfortable and secure anchor. The base was unglazed, a circle of pale, slightly rough clay, and I could just make out the faint, inscribed initials of the person who had made it, a small, final touch of human connection. The mug was cool to the touch, a deep, stony coolness that seemed to hold the memory of its dark, quiet resting place in the cupboard. Holding it felt right. It felt as though it belonged in this cottage, a perfect harmony of rustic simplicity and quiet, understated beauty. It was more than just a container for a drink. It was a small piece of functional art, an object that had been crafted with care and was now about to be used with the same mindful intention. It was the perfect vessel, the only possible choice for this quiet, solitary ceremony. It was a mug that understood the importance of a simple, comforting ritual. With the chosen mug held carefully in one hand, I closed the cabinet door. It shut with a soft, solid sound, its latch falling back into place with a gentle click. The secret of the mugs was once again safely tucked away. I turned and walked back to the hearth, my purpose now clear and my tool in hand. Kneeling once more on the warm stones, I placed the mug down beside the small black cauldron. It sat there, its deep green and blue, a jewel-like splash of color against the dark, rough stone. Beside the pot, resting on the hearth, was a ladle. Like the mug, it was a thing of simple, beautiful utility. It was carved from a single piece of dark wood, its bowl deep, and its handle long and gracefully curved. The wood was worn smooth with use, particularly on the handle where a hand had held it 1,000 times. And it possessed a soft, low polish that could only come from years of patient service. I picked up the ladle, its wooden handle warm from its proximity to the fire. It felt light but strong in my hand, a perfectly balanced and comfortable tool. I held it over the iron pot for a moment, the steam from the cider rising to meet it, coating the dark wood in a fine, glistening sheen of moisture. Then, with a slow, steady motion, I lowered the ladle into the hot, amber liquid. It entered with a soft, deep, liquid sound, a gentle displacement that broke the rhythmic bubbling for just a moment. I felt the gentle resistance of the liquid as I pushed the ladle down, submerging it completely, feeling for the bottom of the pot. Then, I scooped upwards, lifting a full measure of the cider. The ladle came up heavy and dripping, its bowl filled with the steaming, fragrant liquid. A lone cinnamon stick, dark and swollen, rolled gently within the bowl before I carefully nudged it back into the pot. The next movement had to be one of absolute focus and care. I held the ladle suspended over the pot, allowing the excess cider to drip back down. A series of dark, golden drops that made soft, pattering sounds as they hit the surface below. The aroma was now almost intoxicatingly rich, a thick, sweet and spicy cloud of comfort that rose directly into my face. Then, I began the slow, careful process of pouring. I brought the lip of the ladle to the rim of the green ceramic mug, and tilted it just so. A thick, steady stream of amber liquid flowed from the wood into the ceramic, a miniature silent waterfall. The sound it made was beautiful, a soft pouring filling sound that was a perfect harmony of liquid and vessel. Steam billowed up from the mug, a thick white cloud that smelled of heaven. I watched, completely absorbed in the simple, beautiful action, until the mug was nearly full, leaving just enough space at the top to prevent it from spilling. I placed the ladle back on the hearth, its purpose fulfilled. For a long moment I simply knelt there, my hands hovering just above the mug, not yet touching it, but feeling the immense wave of warmth that was radiating from it. The heat was a living presence, a tangible aura of comfort. Finally, I reached out and curled my hands around the mug. The warmth flooded into my palms, a deep and penetrating heat that was almost too intense at first, but quickly mellowed into a profound and wonderful comfort. It was a far more intimate and immediate warmth than that of the fire, a heat that I could hold and possess. It seemed to seep directly into my bones, chasing away the last, deepest vestiges of chill, and replacing them with a feeling of pure, liquid contentment. The ceramic, once cool and stony, was now alive, pulsing with the heat of the liquid it held. Now came the final, careful journey. Holding the mug in both hands, I rose slowly and gracefully to my feet. The full weight of the warm, liquid-filled vessel was a grounding presence, demanding my full attention. The world narrowed to this single task, to carry this small, precious cargo from the hearth to the armchair without spilling a single drop. I began to walk, my steps measured and deliberate, my eyes fixed on the surface of the dark liquid in the mug. It shivered and trembled with each small movement, the firelight dancing and reflecting on its glossy surface. I could feel the heat radiating upwards, warming my face. The scent followed me, a personal cloud of comforting aroma. The armchair waited, a silent, welcoming sentinel in the soft light. Its faded floral fabric, its deep, comfortable-looking cushion. The woolen blanket still resting on its backet was the destination, the final piece of the ritual. I reached it and stopped, standing before it for a silent moment, holding the warm mug, a perfect, self-contained sphere of peace and warmth and anticipation. The focus had been absolute, the ritual complete. The moment of serene contentment was about to begin. The armchair waited. It was not merely a piece of furniture, but a silent and patient participant in the cottage's long history of providing comfort. Its arms, worn smooth and dark with the passage of time and the resting of many elbows, seemed to extend in a gesture of gentle invitation. The floral fabric, a tapestry of muted greens and roses so faded they were almost ghosts, spoke of sunny afternoons and long, quiet evenings. It was a geography of rest, its deep cushion holding the impression of peaceful moments past, a silent promise of the solace it was ready to offer. Standing before it, holding the warm, living weight of the mug, felt like the final step in a long pilgrimage, the arrival at a destination that was not a place, but a state of being. The journey from the door to the hearth and from the hearth to this chair had been a shedding of layers, a slow and deliberate Now, there was nothing left to do but to finally, completely, surrender to the deep and waiting quiet. The movement, when it came, was as slow and deliberate as every action that had preceded it. I turned, the blanket a soft weight shifting around my shoulders, and positioned myself before the chair. One hand came away from the mug, resting for a moment on the worn fabric of an armrest. A gesture of greeting, of acknowledgement. The texture was soft, the weave of the fabric almost velvety after years of use. Then, with the mug held securely in the other hand, I began to lower myself into the chair's embrace. There was no hurry, no sudden drop. It was a slow, controlled descent, a conscious act of placing my trust in the object that waited to receive me. The sensation of sinking into the cushion was one of profound and absolute release. It was not a firm, unyielding surface, but a deep and pillowy softness that seemed to rise up to meet me, to cradle my weight with a gentle, sighing compression. The chair was not something I was sitting on. It was a space I was sinking into. It molded itself around me, its soft, forgiving depths creating a perfect, custom-made hollow of comfort. Once settled, a series of small, final adjustments began, the tiny, instinctual movements of a creature settling into its nest for the night. A slight shifting of weight, a gentle press of my back deeper into the cushion, a small wiggle to find the point of perfect equilibrium. The woolen blanket, which had been draped over my shoulders, was now gathered and tucked in more securely. I pulled one edge over my lap, creating a soft, warm shelf upon which the mug could rest. Its weight was no longer held by my hands alone, but was now supported by my body, a warm, grounding presence at my very center. The world outside the immediate circumference of the chair seemed to recede, to become distant and unimportant. The fire still crackled, its light still danced on the walls, but my awareness had contracted to this small, perfect island of warmth and softness. A long, slow breath, which I hadn't realized I had been holding, escaped my lips in a quiet sigh of pure, unadulterated contentment. My body had found its place. I was anchored, I was at rest. With the body stilled, the mind was free to narrow its focus even further, to the small, warm world held between my hands. The mug rested in my lap, a solid, tangible epicenter of warmth. My hands, which had been actively carrying it, now simply rested around it, cupping its curved form in a gentle, protective embrace. The heat it radiated was no longer a sharp, intense sensation, but a deep, steady, and pervasive warmth that seeped through the thick ceramic and into my palms, my fingers, my very bones. It felt like a transfusion of comfort, a direct transfer of the hearth's gentle energy into my own body. The warmth traveled up my arms, loosening a final hidden layer of tension in my shoulders. My fingers, which had been curled to carry, now relaxed, splaying slightly to maximize their contact with the mug's smooth, warm surface. This was not just holding. It was a communion, a silent conversation between skin and clay. My fingers began a slow, almost unconscious exploration, a blind reading of the mug's surface. They traced the faint concentric rings that circled its body, the subtle ridges and valleys left by the potter's hand. It was a tactile history of its creation, a physical memory of the spinning wheel and the shaping of the wet, pliant clay. The surface was mostly smooth, the glaze like a polished stone, but it was not the cold, sterile perfection of a machine-made object. It had a life, a character, a soul. My thumb, moving in a slow, circular motion, discovered a tiny bump, a place where the glaze had pooled and thickened, a minute imperfection that only made the object feel more real, more honest. Then, my index finger, tracing the curve near the handle, found the other imperfection I had noted earlier, the small frozen teardrop of cobalt blue glaze. It felt different from the surrounding green, its surface slightly raised, its edges perfectly smooth. I closed my eyes for a moment, focusing my entire being on that single, small point of contact, that tiny accidental splash of beauty. In the vast, quiet cottage, on a wild and lonely coast, the entire universe seemed to shrink to the feeling of my fingertip, resting on a single drop of blue on a warm green mug. A new desire began to stir, a natural progression from the sensations of warmth and touch to those of scent and taste. The ritual was not yet complete. The comfort was held in my hands, but it had not yet been fully taken in, not yet made a part of me. The decision to drink was not a thought, but a gentle rising tide of anticipation. My hands, which had been relaxed, now tightened their grip ever so slightly. A subtle shift from passive resting to active purpose. The movement was initiated with an almost imperceptible tensing of the muscles in my arms. Slowly, with a reverence reserved for a ceremonial act, I began to lift the mug from my lap. It rose through the air, its weight a familiar steady presence. The motion was fluid, unhurried, a smooth upward arc that brought the vessel from the center of my body towards my face. There was a sense of rightness to the action, as if this was the only possible thing to do in this moment, the natural and inevitable culmination of the evening's quiet events. As the mug drew closer, a new sensory dimension began to dominate. The cloud of steam, which had been rising as a general, fragrant presence in the air around me, now became a focused, personal atmosphere. It was a warm, damp veil that billowed up to meet my face. I could feel its gentle, ghost-like touch on my skin, a soft and humid caress that moistened my lips and the tip of my nose. The fragrance intensified exponentially, no longer a scent to be observed from a distance, but a world to be inhabited. I paused the mug's upward journey for a moment, holding it just beneath my chin, and closed my eyes again, surrendering completely to the aroma. I took a slow, deep breath, not through my nose, but through my mouth, drawing the very essence of the cider into my lungs. The sweetness of the apples was the first and most dominant note, a rich, baked sweetness, like an orchard warmed by the late autumn sun. This was followed immediately by the sharp, woody warmth of the cinnamon stick, and the deeper, more complex, almost medicinal perfume of the cloves. It was a fragrance that did not just smell good, it felt good. It was the scent of safety, of kindness, of all things cozy and good and right with the world. The final stage of the journey began. I tilted my head forward slightly, bringing my lips to meet the waiting rim of the mug. The ceramic was perfectly, wonderfully warm, a smooth, solid curve that felt incredibly pleasant against my skin. It was not hot enough to burn, but warm enough to feel like a gentle, welcoming kiss. For a heartbeat, there was only this connection, this point of contact between myself and the vessel. The world held its breath. The fire crackled, a distant crackling whisper. The scent of the cider was an enveloping cloud. In that brief, silent pause, anticipation reached its peak, a quiet, thrilling moment of pure potential before the final, wonderful release. It was a moment of perfect, serene focus, a tiny, suspended eternity where all that existed was the promise of the warmth and the sweetness that was to come. Then, with a final infinitesimal tilt of my wrists, the ritual reached its climax. The dark, amber liquid sloshed gently, rising to meet the rim and then spilling over in a slow, controlled wave. The first touch of the hot cider on my tongue was a revelation. It was a wave of pure liquid warmth that spread instantly through my mouth, a deeply soothing and incredibly delicious sensation. The taste was a perfect and harmonious symphony of flavors. It was sweet, but it was a deep, natural sweetness. The honest sweetness of ripe apples, beautifully balanced by a subtle, underlying tartness that kept it from being cloying. The spices were not overwhelming, but were perfectly infused into the liquid. The cinnamon providing a gentle woody heat, the cloves a hint of something more exotic and complex. The texture was sublime. It was not thin and watery, but full-bodied and velvety, a liquid silk that coated my tongue and the roof of my mouth in a blanket of pure flavor. I held the liquid in my mouth for a moment longer, savoring the complex interplay of sweet and spice, of warmth and flavor. Then, I swallowed. The sensation of the hot, velvety liquid tracing a path down my throat was one of the most comforting feelings imaginable. It was a line of pure warmth, a tangible trail of solace, descending from my mouth into the very core of my body. It was a journey from the external to the internal, the final and most intimate stage of my arrival at the cottage. The comfort was no longer something I was sitting in, or wrapped in, or holding in my hands. It was now inside me, a part of my own physical being. I could feel the warmth spreading, not just into my stomach, but blooming outwards into my chest, a gentle, radiating star of heat that seemed to loosen every muscle and calm every nerve as it expanded. I slowly lowered the mug back to its resting place on my lap, my hands once again cupping its warm, round form. A final, involuntary sigh escaped my lips, a sound of pure and utter satisfaction. The first sip was over, but its effects lingered. A pleasant, spicy sweet aftertaste remained on my tongue, a gentle reminder of the delicious moment just past. But more than that was the feeling of a deep, internal glow, a warmth that now radiated from my center, joining with the warmth of the fire and the blanket to create a perfect, unbroken sphere of comfort. The ritual was complete. The hands had performed their quiet, sacred duty. The circle of warmth which had begun at the distant fire had now been brought into the very core of my being. I leaned my head back against the soft, worn fabric of the armchair, closed my eyes, and for a long, timeless moment, I simply existed in a state of perfect, silent, and deeply grateful peace. Leaning my head back against the soft, worn fabric of the armchair, my body found a state of stillness so profound, it felt as though I were slowly dissolving into the very fabric of the room. My eyelids grew heavy, not with a pressing need for sleep, but with the weight of a deep and pervasive tranquility. They lowered slowly, transforming the scene before me from a clear, distinct picture into a soft, blurry world of light and shadow, viewed through the narrowest of apertures. My focus, now diffused and dreamlike, settled upon the one source of movement, in the quiet space, the fire. The hearth was no longer just a source of warmth. It became a stage, a canvas upon which a silent and endlessly fascinating drama was being played out. It was a performance that had no beginning and no end, a timeless ritual of transformation that commanded a gentle and unwavering attention. Through the soft filter of my lashes, the flames lost their sharp edges, becoming liquid forms of pure light that swayed and eddied in a slow, hypnotic ballet. The colors were impossibly rich and vibrant, a living palette that shifted with every passing second. At the heart of the fire, where the heat was most intense, the flames burned with a brilliant, almost white gold intensity, a core of pure, incandescent energy. From this radiant center, tongues of luminous yellow and deep, molten orange leaped upwards, curling and unfurling like silken banners in a slow and silent wind. Higher still, where the flames kissed the cool air of the chimney, the colors deepened into a rich ruby red, the color of old wine held up to a candle. And at the very tips of the highest flames, a flicker of translucent blue, a ghostly and ephemeral presence, would occasionally appear for a heartbeat before vanishing. Watching this constant, fluid metamorphosis was like watching the thoughts of the cottage itself, a beautiful and wordless expression of its ancient, fiery soul. The fire's light, the only true light in the room, was a living presence. It did not simply illuminate, it transformed. It washed over the familiar objects of the room and gave them a new and secret life. The row of books on the far wall was no longer a static collection, but a slumbering audience, their spines catching the flickering light in brief, golden flashes. The simple wooden table in the corner seemed to glow with a deep, internal warmth, its surface a pool of liquid amber. But it was the shadows that were the true magic. They were not mere absences of light, but deep, velvety entities in their own right. They stretched and shrank with the fire's every whim, elongating into impossibly long skeletal fingers that reached across the floor, only to retreat a moment later into soft, rounded pools of darkness. The shadow of the armchair in which I sat became a great, protective wing, enveloping me in its soft, dark embrace. The entire room seemed to be gently, rhythmically breathing, the walls expanding and contracting with the pulsing, living light of the fire. I was not in a static room. I was inside a gentle, sleeping lung, and the fire was its slow, and steady, and peaceful heart. As my eyes finally drifted fully closed, the world of sight receded completely, and in its place, the world of sound rose to prominence. The silence in the cottage was not an emptiness. It was a presence, a thick, soft and heavy blanket of quiet that muffled the sharp edges of the world. But it was not a total silence. Woven into its very fabric was the intricate and delicate music of the hearth. My hearing, now sharpened and focused, began to dissect this beautiful, simple symphony. The most immediate sound was the fire's voice, a constant, gentle, and reassuring hiss. The sound of air and heat and wood in a state of perfect harmonious communion. It was a sound like a long, slow exhalation, a whisper that had been speaking in this room for centuries. This steady, whispering hum was the baseline, the fundamental note upon which all the other sounds were built. Upon this soft foundation of hissing whispers, a more percussive and unpredictable music was layered. There was the sharp, sudden crackle of a log succumbing to the heat, a sound as clean and distinct as a twig snapping underfoot in a dry forest. This was often followed by a series of smaller, more delicate popping sounds, a gentle crackling applause as pockets of sap and moisture within the wood vaporized in tiny, contained explosions. Occasionally a log would shift, settling deeper into its glowing bed of embers, with a soft, woody sigh and a shower of bright fleeting sparks. These sounds were not jarring or disruptive. They were the punctuation marks in the fire's long, slow monologue. The moments of gentle emphasis that only served to deepen the surrounding peace. Each pop, each crackle, was a small and welcome affirmation of the life and the warmth that held the deep silence of the cottage at bay. And beyond the immediate and intimate music of the fire, there was a third and final layer to the soundscape. A sound so subtle it was almost a feeling, a vibration in the air rather than something consciously heard. It was the sound of the world outside. Through the thick stone walls and the small deep-set windows, I could just perceive the low, mournful murmur of the wind. It was not a violent or threatening sound. Its force was blunted and softened by the cottage's sturdy embrace. It was a distant bass note, a deep humming sigh that spoke of the vast, open and wild spaces that lay just beyond these walls. The sound was not a threat to the peace within, it was its confirmation. The gentle, almost inaudible howl of the wind only served to highlight the profound safety and stillness of my refuge. It was the sound of the world's restlessness, a restlessness from which I was completely and utterly sheltered. The fire's crackle was the sound of my safety, and the wind's distant murmur was the proof of it. With the world of sight and sound now fully mapped and understood, my awareness sank deeper, into the realm of pure physical sensation, the complex and beautiful interplay of texture and scent. I sank another, impossible inch into the armchair, and a new consciousness of touch arose. It was a layering of feelings, a collage of comfort. My hands were still cupped around the ceramic mug, and I could feel the dense, smooth, and unwavering heat of the vessel against my palms. It was a contained and focused warmth, a small, personal sun that I held in my own two hands. Beneath and around this focal point of heat was the soft, airy embrace of the woolen blanket. Its texture was a gentle, fibrous caress against my skin, its warmth a more diffuse and breathable comfort that enveloped my entire body. And supporting all of this was the deep, yielding softness of the armchair itself, its velvety, time-worn fabric, a final, foundational layer of pure, unadulterated comfort. I was nested in a series of concentric circles of warmth and softness, each layer distinct, yet all of them working in perfect harmony. This complex world of touch was inextricably woven together with the world of scent. The two were not separate experiences, but a single, unified reality. The warmth of the mug in my hands was inseparable from the sweet, spicy aroma of the cider that rose from it in a constant, gentle cloud. The fragrance was a tangible part of the warmth. To feel one was to smell the other. The soft, clean scent of the wool blanket was a part of its texture, a dry and comforting fragrance that spoke of sheep and open fields. And the armchair, too, had its own subtle perfume, the faint, dusty scent of ages, of old fabric and the countless quiet evenings it had witnessed. All of these immediate scents were held within the larger atmosphere of the room, the foundational perfume of the cottage itself. The sharp, clean, and slightly resinous scent of the burning applewood smoke, the faint, sweet aroma of old beeswax from the polished furniture, and the dry, almost vanilla-like perfume of the aging books on the shelves. To breathe in this room was to inhale a complex and deeply soothing potion, a scent that spoke not just of comfort, but of history, of continuity, and of a deep and abiding peace. A quiet desire, born not of thirst but of a wish to deepen this sensory immersion, guided my hands once more. The ritual was not quite complete. There was one more layer to explore, one more gate to pass through on the journey to absolute tranquility. My hands, moving with a dreamlike slowness, began to lift the mug again, bringing it on its slow, familiar journey from my lap to my lips. This time, the action was even more deliberate, more mindful than the first. I was not just seeking the comfort of the drink, but was consciously seeking to understand its nuances, to appreciate its subtleties. The cloud of steam that met my face was now like the greeting of an old and trusted friend, a warm, fragrant welcome that I received with a quiet, internal smile. My lips met the warm ceramic rim, a familiar and comforting point of contact. The second sip was different from the first. It was slower, smaller, a more contemplative tasting. The liquid that flowed into my mouth was the same, and yet it was entirely new. My palate, now calm and receptive, was able to perceive the deeper layers of flavor. Beneath the immediate, honest sweetness of the apple, I could now taste a more subtle, almost floral note and a faint, pleasant bitterness from the skin of the fruit. The cinnamon was not just a general warmth, but a distinct woody flavor, and I could now isolate the unique, pungent, and almost numbing quality of the cloves. I let the liquid rest on my tongue for a long moment, allowing all its secrets to unfold. Then, I swallowed, and the familiar, beautiful line of warmth traced its path downwards. A river of comfort flowing to the sea of peace that was already established in my core. I lowered the mug back to my lap, its journey complete. I did not open my eyes. There was no need. The true vision, the true understanding, was now happening on the inside. All of the disparate sensory threads, the golden dancing light of the fire, the soft crackling music of the logs, the distant murmur of the wind, the layered warmth of ceramic and wool and velvet, the complex perfume of cider and smoke and old paper. The lingering, spicy sweet taste on my tongue began to weave themselves together. They were no longer separate and distinct sensations to be observed one by one. They began to merge, to dissolve into one another, their boundaries blurring and then disappearing completely. The warmth of the cider in my belly became one with the warmth of the fire on my skin. The scent of the spices became one with their taste. The silence of the room became the silence of my own mind. It was all a single, unified, and all-encompassing experience. A wave, not of any one sensation, but of all of them at once. A wave of pure and absolute being, washed over me. It was a wave of peace, so profound and so complete, that it seemed to dissolve the very idea of a self that was separate from the room, from the fire, from the quiet of the night. There was only the peace itself, and I was floating, timeless and serene, in its deep and gentle and endless ocean. The world behind my closed eyelids was a soft and gentle darkness, a warm and welcome void. The sensory inputs from the cottage, the heat of the fire, the weight of the blanket, the murmur of the wind had resolved themselves into a single, unified field of peace. My thoughts had ceased their endless, chattering monologue, and in their place, there was only a profound and simple state of being. And in this stillness, on the quiet stage of my palate, the ghosts of the cider lingered. It was a faint but persistent presence, a delicate tapestry of flavor woven from threads of baked apple and the gentle warmth of spice. It was more than a taste. It was an echo, a memory of a sensation, a sweet and lingering whisper that clung to the senses long after the sip itself was gone. It was this echo, this quiet, fading note of sweetness and warmth, that became the key. It was not a key I sought, nor one I consciously turned. It simply, gently, and without any effort on my part, found a lock deep within me, a door that had been closed for so many years I had forgotten it was even there. The key turned with an almost imperceptible click, and the door, without a sound, began to swing slowly, silently, open. The transition was not a sudden jolt, but a slow and graceful dissolve, a gentle bleeding of one reality into another. The soft darkness behind my eyes did not vanish, but it began to fill with a different quality of light. It was not the flickering golden-orange light of the fire, but a pale, steady, and silvery white light, the kind of light that exists only on a day when the world is covered in a thick blanket of snow. The crackling of the logs in the hearth did not cease, but it began to blend with and then be replaced by a different sound, a rhythmic and comforting thump scrape of a wooden spoon being stirred against the bottom of a very large pot. The complex perfume of the cottage, the scent of wood smoke and old books, began to thin, and in its place, a single, powerful, and unbelievably evocative aroma swelled to fill the senses. The smell of apples and cinnamon, not just warming in a small pot, but cooking in a great quantity, a scent so rich and all-encompassing, it felt like a physical presence, a warm and fragrant cloud that you could almost taste in the air. The armchair in which I sat seemed to melt away, and my feet, now impossibly small, were no longer tucked beneath a woolen blanket, but were dangling high above a polished wooden floor. I had not traveled to a memory. The memory had, with the utmost gentleness, come to surround and inhabit me. The room that came into focus was a kitchen, but it was a kitchen of grand and generous proportions, the heart of a house that was always full of life and warmth. The ceiling was high, the walls were a cheerful, buttery yellow, and a vast wooden table, its surface scarred with the history of 1,000 meals and projects, stood in the center of the room like a great, friendly beast. A huge window, made up of many small, square panes, looked out onto a world of pure, silent white. The branches of a great oak tree, just outside the window, were heavy with snow, each delicate twig outlined in perfect, crystalline detail. The winter light streamed through that window, a cool, clean light that filled the room but held no warmth of its own. All the warmth, all the life, all the comfort, in this vast, bright room, came from the far end, where a huge stove stood against the wall, and from the figure who stood before it. She was my grandmother. She did not turn, and she did not speak. Her presence was a quiet and absolute certainty. Her back was to me, her shoulders wrapped in a soft, knitted shawl, and her entire being was focused on the gentle, rhythmic stirring of the contents of the huge, steaming pot on the stove. She was not just making something to eat. She was performing a slow and sacred alchemy, transforming simple fruit and spice into pure, liquid comfort. Every detail of the scene was imprinted with a clarity that surpassed even present reality. I could see the way the pale winter light reflected off the worn, polished floorboards, creating long, cool rectangles of brightness. I could see the faint cloud of her breath as she hummed a tune so low and soft it was more a vibration in the air than a sound. I could see the comfortable, worn shape of her slippers on the floor. The entire room was a sanctuary, a warm and fragrant island in the middle of a vast, cold, and silent world. To be in that kitchen was to know a feeling of safety so profound and so absolute that it was simply a fact. As undeniable as the floor beneath my feet or the air in my lungs, it was a safety that was not built of locks on doors, but of a presence, of the quiet, steady, and unconditional love that radiated from the small, shawled figure at the stove. It was the feeling that whatever storms might rage in the world outside, here, within these 4 yellow walls, all was, and always would be, well. Then, the rhythmic stirring stopped. The gentle thump scrape ceased, and a new, more profound silence settled over the room. My grandmother placed the long wooden spoon carefully on a small, waiting dish. She turned, not quickly, but with the slow, deliberate grace that characterized all her movements. Her face, when it came into view, was a map of kindness, her eyes holding a soft, crinkling smile that seemed to be her permanent state of being. She looked across the vast expanse of the kitchen, and her eyes met mine. There was no surprise, only a gentle knowing recognition. She did not say my name, she did not need to. Her smile was a greeting, a welcome, and a question all in one. A silent conversation passed between us in that look, a simple and perfect understanding that transcended any need for words. She turned to a nearby counter, and with the same unhurried grace, she picked something up and began to walk towards me, her soft slippers making a gentle shushing sound on the wooden floor. As she drew closer, I could see what she was carrying. It was a mug, held carefully in her two hands. But it was not just any mug. It was my mug, my own special vessel, reserved for me alone in this vast and wonderful kitchen. It was a large, heavy, and wonderfully clumsy piece of ceramic, far too big for the small hands that were about to receive it. It was a cheerful, bright blue, and on its side was the faded, slightly scratched image of a small, smiling bear wearing a yellow hat. I knew its every feature with an intimacy that felt more real than my knowledge of my own hands now. I knew the exact location of the tiny, hairline crack that ran down from the rim, a flaw that was visible only if you caught it in just the right light. And I knew, with an absolute certainty, the small, sharp chip on the base, a secret imperfection that my own small fingers would often seek out and trace while I drank. It was a part of me, an extension of my own childhood identity, a symbol of my special place in this warm and wonderful world. She stopped before me, and the air between us was filled with the rich, billowing steam that rose from the mug she held. The scent of hot, sweet, spiced apples was almost overwhelming, a fragrance so dense and so wonderful it made my small head feel dizzy with pleasure. She leaned down, her movements slow and careful, and her smile never leaving her eyes. She did not hand the mug to me. Instead, she guided it, placing it gently into my own small, waiting, and slightly trembling hands. The moment the mug was mine, the moment my fingers curled around its familiar, oversized form, the world seemed to settle into a new and even more perfect state of equilibrium. The warmth of the ceramic was a shock, a sudden and wonderful flood of heat that sank deep into my cold fingers and spread up my arms. The mug was heavy, a substantial and reassuring weight that required my full attention and both my hands to hold steady. It was a responsibility, a great and glorious trust that was being placed in me, and my small heart swelled with a silent, simple pride. I lifted the mug, a slow and wobbly journey, towards my face. My small arms trembled with the effort of lifting the heavy liquid-filled vessel. I could feel the heat radiating from it, a personal and private sun warming my chin and my nose. The cloud of steam enveloped my face, and I closed my eyes, just as I had done a moment, or a lifetime, ago in the armchair. I breathed in the scent, and it was the scent of my grandmother's love. The scent of winter afternoons, the scent of being small and safe and cherished beyond all measure. My lips found the familiar thick rim of the mug, and I navigated by touch to the one smooth spot that was not near the tiny hairline crack. I tilted the mug with an infinite and painstaking care, and a small amount of the hot, sweet liquid flowed into my mouth. The taste was a supernova of comfort, a flavor so deeply and profoundly right that it seemed to resonate not just on my tongue, but in the very core of my soul. It was the taste of home. And in that moment, with the sweet, hot liquid in my mouth and the warm, heavy mug in my hands, came the culmination of the memory. It was not a thought, not an idea, not a specific event. It was a feeling, a pure and overwhelming wave of emotion that was so powerful it was almost a physical sensation. It was the feeling of being loved, completely, unconditionally, and without any need for merit. It was the silent, unspoken knowledge that my existence was a source of quiet joy to this gentle, smiling woman. It was a safety that went beyond the warmth of the kitchen, a safety that was rooted in the very fact of her presence. The simple, humble act of being given a warm drink became a sacrament, a transfer of love and care so profound that it imprinted itself upon my soul, a memory of feeling that would lie dormant for decades, waiting for the right key to unlock its door. It was the foundational memory of comfort, upon which all other experiences of comfort in my life would be built. The image of the yellow kitchen did not vanish abruptly. it began to fade, slowly and with a gentle reluctance. The bright, cool winter light behind my closed eyelids was gradually, tenderly, replaced by the flickering, warm orange of the fire. The distant humming silence of the snow-covered world gave way to the low, sighing murmur of the wind around the cottage. The rhythmic thump-scrape of the wooden spoon was once again the gentle crackle of burning logs. The sensation of the large chipped blue mug in my small hands dissolved, and I became aware once more of the smooth green and perfectly intact mug resting in my lap. The sweet, powerful taste of my grandmother's kitchen faded, leaving behind the more subtle, but no less comforting, aftertaste of the cider I had made for myself. The memory receded, not leaving a void, but a gift. It did not take the warmth with it, it left it behind, a deep and glowing ember added to the fire of the present moment. The door had closed again, but the room it had revealed was now a part of me. I was no longer just a solitary traveler who had found a temporary refuge. I was a person carrying a quiet, internal sanctuary, a warmth that no winter wind could ever extinguish. A single, silent tear, born not of sadness but of an immense and overwhelming gratitude, escaped my closed eye and traced a slow, warm path down my cheek. The memory receded with the same tender grace with which it had arrived, not leaving a sudden, jarring void, but slowly, gently, dissolving like mist in a warming light. It left behind not a feeling of loss, but an inheritance, a deep and glowing warmth that now resided in the center of my chest, a warmth that was indistinguishable from the heat of the cider I had drunk. The two had become one, a single, indivisible sensation of comfort. My consciousness, which had been adrift in the deep sweet waters of the past, slowly returned to the shores of the present, re-inhabiting my body, reawakening to the physical realities of the room. The first sensation to register was a delicate and surprising coolness on my cheek. It was a thin, damp track, and with a slow, dawning awareness, I recognized what it was: a tear. A single, solitary tear, born of an emotion so profound and so gentle, it had slipped out unnoticed. It was the physical evidence of the memory's passage, a tiny, salty relic of that beautiful, silent communion with the past. The tear was cool, but the skin all around it was warm, and in that simple physical contrast, the whole truth of the moment seemed to be contained. The present was a warm and living shelter, and the past was a beautiful, cherished guest who had just departed, leaving behind a small, poignant token of its visit. A thought, the first coherent and deliberate thought in what felt like a timeless age, began to form. It was not a complex or demanding thought, but a simple and profoundly gentle wave of pure gratitude. It rose from the quiet, warm sea of contentment in my chest, a silent and heartfelt acknowledgement of the profound and simple beauty of this moment. The thought was not directed at any one thing, but seemed to expand outwards, to touch and to bless every element of my immediate reality. A wave of thankfulness washed over me for the chair, for this anonymous and wonderfully comfortable armchair that was holding my body with such unwavering and gentle support. Its solid frame, its deep and forgiving cushions, its soft, time-worn fabric. It was not just an object, but a guardian, a silent and sturdy accomplice in the creation of this perfect peace. It asked for nothing, but gave everything, its entire existence dedicated to the simple, noble purpose of providing rest. My silent gratitude then flowed towards the fire, the room's living, breathing heart. It was a presence, a companion in the solitude, a steady and faithful friend. Its light was a painter, transforming the humble room into a masterpiece of shifting gold and shadow. Its warmth was a blanket, a tangible and constant embrace that held the chill of the outside world at bay. Its voice was a musician, its soft and gentle, crackling a lullaby that had soothed the very foundations of my soul. It was a creature of beautiful and simple needs, asking only for wood to consume, and in return, it offered the trinity of comfort, light, and warmth, and a gentle, living sound. To be in its presence was to be cared for, to be watched over by a tireless and benevolent spirit. My gaze, though my eyes were still closed, turned towards it, and a silent, heartfelt thank you was offered to its dancing, generous flames. The gratitude expanded further, beyond the tangible objects, to embrace the intangible. It reached for the silence, the deep, profound, and velvet soft silence of the cottage. It was a silence that was not empty, but full. It was full of peace, full of potential, full of a deep and resonant calm. In the world beyond these thick stone walls, silence was a rare and fleeting commodity, a brief pause between one noise and the next. But here, silence was the natural state of being. It was a protective medium, a thick and insulating blanket that shielded the soul from the endless, clamoring demands of the world. And within this beautiful, profound silence, a new realization blossomed. I was completely and utterly alone, a solitary soul in a secluded cottage on a quiet coast. And yet, the feeling within me was not one of loneliness. It was its opposite. It was a feeling of wholeness, of a quiet and joyful self-sufficiency. To be alone here was not to be lacking company. It was to be in the best possible company, the company of a quieted mind and a contented heart. This feeling, this beautiful and unexpected gift of solitude without loneliness, became a new focus for my contemplation. I began to gently, and without any pressure, examine its nature. What was this deep and abiding peace? The wind sighed outside, a low and mournful sound that was a clear and constant reminder of the world beyond. The world, with all its struggles, its complexities, its sorrows, and its demands, had not ceased to exist simply because I had closed a door upon it. It was still there, turning on its axis, moving through its endless cycles of turmoil and grace. And yet, it could not touch me. The peace I was feeling was not ignorance, and it was not an escape. It was not a fragile state that depended on the absence of trouble in the world. It was something far more resilient, far more real. The realization that unfolded in the quiet of my mind was both simple and profound. True peace, I understood, was not an external condition. It was not the absence of storms, but the presence of a quiet and unshakable center within the heart of the storm. It was not a destination to be reached, a place where all problems were solved, and all questions answered. It was a way of being. It was the simple, radical act of being fully and completely present in a single, simple, and self-contained moment. This moment, the moment of holding a warm mug, of being held by a soft chair, of watching a gentle fire. This moment was complete. It required nothing from the past, and asked nothing of the future. It contained, within its own humble and finite boundaries, a feeling of infinite and perfect contentment. It was a universe of its own, and in this moment, I was its sole and grateful inhabitant. This understanding felt like a gift, a piece of quiet wisdom that had been waiting for me here in the silence of the cottage. It was a truth that I knew, with a sudden and deep certainty, would change the very texture of my life. The search for peace was not a journey outwards, but inwards. The materials for its construction were not grand or expensive or rare. They were the simple, humble, and readily available elements of everyday life. A warm drink, a comfortable chair, a moment of quiet, a gentle memory. The secret was not in the acquisition of these things, but in the quality of attention that was brought to them. It was the act of noticing, of appreciating, of allowing a simple sensation to fill the entirety of one's awareness. This was the alchemy. This was the key. Peace was not a thing to be found, but a state to be inhabited. And with this new and precious understanding came a new and quiet resolve. A gentle but firm intention began to form in the very center of my being. This moment, this perfect and simple and profound moment, was too valuable to be allowed to simply fade, to become another hazy and half-forgotten memory. It was a treasure, a jewel of an experience that needed to be preserved. I would not just experience it, I would keep it. I would create a space for it within the very architecture of my soul, a quiet and hidden room to which I could always, always return. The decision was not a frantic grasping, but a calm and loving act of preservation. It was a promise I was making to my future self, a gift that I was preparing for the person I would be when I was once again caught in the inevitable storms of life. The action was purely internal, a gathering and focusing of the will. I took a slow, deep breath, and as I inhaled, I imagined that I was breathing in the very essence of the moment. I was inhaling the warmth of the fire, the scent of the cider, the weight of the blanket, the deep and profound silence of the room. I was drawing it all into myself, not just into my lungs, but into the very fabric of my being. My mind, now a silent and receptive instrument, began to carefully, lovingly, record the details. It was not a frantic or anxious process, but a slow and mindful act of deep observation. It was the mental equivalent of tracing a beloved object with a gentle and reverent finger. I committed to this internal sanctuary the exact shade of the deep, mossy green of the mug in my hands, and the feel of the single, perfect drop of blue glaze beneath my thumb. I committed the precise way the firelight danced on the dark, wooden ceiling beams, creating shifting patterns like slow-moving water. I committed the sound of a log crackling, that sharp, clean pop, followed by the soft, whispering sigh of settling embers. I committed the feeling of the woolen blanket's soft, fibrous texture against my skin, and the deep, yielding softness of the armchair's embrace. I gathered these sensations, not as a jumble of disconnected data, but as a single, unified, and perfectly composed whole. I was taking a photograph, not with a camera, but with my soul, capturing not just the image, but the feeling, the atmosphere, the very spirit of this perfect and unrepeatable moment. And then, with a slow, gentle exhalation, I completed the act. I imagined myself taking this perfect, luminous memory and placing it carefully into a quiet and protected place deep within me. It was like placing a small, glowing ember into the hearth of my own heart, a living seed of warmth and light that would never go out. The consequence of this silent internal ritual was immediate and profound. A new feeling began to layer itself upon the deep contentment. It was a feeling of quiet strength, of a newfound and unshakable resilience. The peace of this moment was no longer just a transient and fleeting experience, dependent on this specific chair, in this specific cottage. It was now a part of me. It was a resource, an anchor, a haven that I would carry within me wherever I went. The gratitude I felt was no longer just for the moment itself, but for the profound and beautiful realization that the moment, now and forever, belonged to me. Time, in the deep quiet of the cottage, had ceased to be a river flowing in one direction, and had become a deep and tranquil pool in which I floated, suspended and serene. There was no sense of minutes or hours passing, only a slow, gentle, and almost imperceptible cooling, a gradual return to equilibrium. The mug, which had been a vessel of potent, penetrating heat, was now merely warm, its fiery soul having slowly dissipated into my hands and into the quiet air. It was a pleasant and gentle warmth now, the warmth of a sun-warmed stone at the end of a long afternoon, a warmth that spoke not of becoming, but of being. The journey of comfort had reached its natural and peaceful conclusion. A quiet internal signal, a gentle and unspoken consensus between body and mind, indicated that the ritual was complete. It was time. My hands, which had been resting in a state of relaxed and open stillness, slowly, deliberately, re-engaged with their purpose. They tightened their grip around the mug, a familiar and comfortable embrace, and began the slow, final ascent. The last sip was a different experience from all that had come before. It was an act not of sensory indulgence, but of quiet and gentle closure. The liquid that met my lips was no longer hot but tepid, a lukewarm echo of its former self. The flavors of apple and spice were still present, but they were softer now, more muted, like a beautiful song heard from a great distance. It was a taste that was deeply familiar, yet imbued with a new and gentle melancholy, the beautiful sadness that accompanies the end of any perfect thing. It was the final, fading note of a beautiful symphony, a quiet and lingering farewell. I held the liquid in my mouth for a moment, a final, thoughtful tasting, and then I swallowed. The warmth that traced its way down my throat was a gentle ghost, a faint and pleasant memory of the potent heat that had come before. I lowered the mug and tilted it one last time, confirming what I already knew. It was empty. The lightness of the vessel was a surprise, its purpose fulfilled, its life-giving contents now a warm and glowing presence in my own core. The ritual was well and truly over. The decision to move, to leave the deep and perfect sanctuary of the armchair, was not a difficult one, but it was one that required a certain gentle resolve. The body, having found a state of such profound rest, was reluctant to leave it. A quiet negotiation took place, an internal conversation of soft persuasion. It was a promise that the peace would not be broken, but merely transitioned into a different form. A movement from receptive stillness to a quiet and mindful action. I placed the empty green mug carefully on the floor beside the chair, its small, solid form a temporary anchor. My hands, now free, moved to the woolen blanket that was still draped over my lap and shoulders. The wool was still warm, imbued with the heat of my own body, and it felt impossibly soft against my skin. The act of rising would mean leaving this warm and personal cocoon, this soft and private nest that I had created. Slowly I began the process of extrication. My hands found the arms of the chair, their smooth, worn wooden surfaces, a cool and solid point of purchase. I pressed down, and the muscles in my arms and legs, long dormant, engaged with a soft and gentle protest. My body lifted from the deep cushion with a slow and deliberate grace. Not a sudden, jarring movement, but a gradual, peeling away from the chair's deep embrace. The cushion sighed softly as my weight was removed, a faint exhalation of compressed air, as if the chair itself were bidding me a gentle farewell. I stood for a moment beside it, feeling the full length of my body again, a strange and novel sensation after being so deeply settled. The woolen blanket slipped from my shoulders and pulled softly around my waist. I gathered it in my arms, its weight a comforting and familiar presence. It sent a wonderful dry perfume of wool and wood. Standing in the soft, flickering light of the fire, I began to fold the blanket. This was not a chore, not a mindless tidying, but the final, respectful step in the ritual of rest. It was an act of gratitude offered to the object that had provided such simple and profound comfort. I held it up, letting its full length unfold, a great soft rectangle of heather gray wool. The warmth it held was still palpable. I made the first fold, bringing the two shorter ends together, my hands moving in a slow and synchronized rhythm. The wool was pleasingly heavy, its texture a soft and honest roughness under my fingertips. I smoothed the folded surface, pressing out any wrinkles, a gesture of care and attention. I folded it again, and then a third time, transforming the large, flowing object into a neat, compact, and satisfyingly dense square. It felt like I was putting a feeling to bed, tucking away the comfort it had given me, preserving it for the next time it would be needed. I leaned over the armchair and placed the folded blanket carefully, reverently, over the back, restoring it to the exact state in which I had first found it. The sanctuary was now empty, the nest tidied, its purpose fulfilled, waiting patiently for the next weary soul in need of its quiet embrace. My gaze then fell upon the empty green mug, sitting silently on the floor. The final phase of the evening's quiet work had arrived, the gentle act of restoration, of leaving this peaceful place exactly as I had found it. I bent down, my knees cracking softly in the deep silence, and retrieved it. It was cool now, its heat almost completely gone, its surface having returned to the stony neutrality of its natural ceramic state. Holding it, I turned my attention away from the immediate, glowing world of the hearth, and looked into the deeper, shadowed corners of the room. My eyes found what they were looking for, a small, rustic basin set into a wooden stand, tucked into an alcove not far from the cupboard where the mugs were kept. It was a simple and functional setup, a place for quiet domestic rituals. I began to walk towards it, my socked feet making no sound on the wide dark floorboards. The journey was a passage from one quality of light to another. I left the direct dancing, golden orange glow of the fire and entered a realm of deeper, softer, and more stable shadows. The basin was a beautiful, simple object in its own right. It had been carved from a single, large piece of pale gray stone, its interior worn, smooth, and almost polished by the passage of water over many years, while its exterior remained rough and chiseled, a pleasing contrast of textures. Next to it, on the wooden stand, sat a large ceramic pitcher, its shape full and generous, its glaze a simple, creamy white. It was cool and heavy in my hands as I lifted it. There was no sound from within, but I could feel the internal shifting of a substantial weight of water. My other hand held the green mug over the center of the stone basin, a small and colorful object in the pale, smooth hollow. I tilted the heavy pitcher, and the silence was broken by a new and wonderful sound. A thick, clear, and utterly silent stream of cold water poured forth from the pitcher's spout. The sound it made as it hit the inside of the mug was a sharp, musical splash, a high, clean note that echoed for a moment in the stone basin. The sensation of the cold water, as it inevitably splashed over my fingers, was a small and welcome shock. It was a jolt of pure, clean cold, that was a startling but not unpleasant contrast to the pervasive warmth of the rest of the evening. It was a sensation that brought a sharp and clarifying focus to my mind. I swirled the water inside the mug, the liquid making a soft, sloshing sound, its coolness leaching the last, faint traces of warmth from the ceramic. I poured the water out into the stone basin, where it swirled for a moment before disappearing down a small dark hole with a gentle gurgling sigh. I repeated the process one more time, ensuring the mug was perfectly clean, its interior now glistening and wet. Beside the basin, a simple, clean cloth of natural, unbleached linen was neatly folded. I picked it up. The texture was crisp and slightly rough, and it smelled of nothing but clean air and sunshine. The act of drying the mug was as mindful and deliberate as every other action of the evening. I wrapped the linen cloth around its smooth, curved form, and the absorbent fabric immediately began to drink the moisture from the ceramic surface. I polished the outside, my hands moving in slow circular motions, feeling the texture of the cloth against the smooth glaze. Then I carefully dried the inside, my fingers guiding the cloth into the mug's clean, curved depths. In a matter of moments, the mug was transformed. It was no longer wet and glistening, but perfectly dry. Its deep green glaze now holding a soft, low sheen, the single drop of cobalt blue, a tiny, brilliant jewel. It was clean, it was restored, it was ready. It felt not just like a physical cleansing, but a spiritual one. A small act of purification that brought a deep and quiet sense of satisfaction. With the clean, dry mug in my hand, I made my final journey of the evening. I walked the few short steps to the small wooden cabinet that had been the source of this quiet adventure. My fingers found the familiar leaf-shaped iron latch, and I opened the door. The cool, dry, woody air from within greeted me like an old friend. The other mugs stood in their quiet, friendly line, a silent and waiting family. I looked at the green mug in my hand one last time, a silent acknowledgement of the comfort it had helped to provide. Then, I reached into the cabinet and placed it carefully back in its spot, nestled gently between the earthy terracotta and the pale, creamy white. It slid into place with a soft, ceramic whisper, rejoining its companions, its journey over. I closed the cabinet door, and the latch fell into place with a final, satisfying click. There was only one thing left to do. I returned to the hearth, to the fire that was now burning lower, its flames a deep and gentle red, its voice a soft and sleepy crackle. The wooden ladle was still resting on the hearthstones where I had left it. I picked it up. Its surface was warm, and it carried the faint, lingering scent of the cider it had so generously served. I hung it on a small, simple iron hook that protruded from the stone of the chimney breast, its proper and designated home. It hung there, a dark, graceful curve against the warm stone, a silent and faithful servant now at rest. My work was done. The quiet cycle was complete. I stood for a long moment in the center of the room, taking it all in. The folded blanket on the empty chair, the clean mug in the closed cupboard, the ladle hanging by the fire. Everything was in its place. The room was restored to a state of perfect, peaceful, and expectant stillness, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for the dawn of a new day. And in my heart, there was a feeling of deep and profound rightness. The quiet and simple joy of having not just received comfort, but of having been a gentle and grateful steward of its source. The quiet work was done. The cottage, which had offered its comfort so freely, had been restored to its natural state of serene and patient order. I stood for a long timeless moment in the center of the room, a silent and grateful observer, my task now complete. My gaze was drawn, one final time, to the hearth. The fire, which had been the evening's bright and cheerful companion, had now entered its final and most peaceful stage of life. The leaping, dancing flames of gold and orange had receded, their boisterous energy spent. In their place, a new and far more tranquil beauty had emerged. The logs, now transformed into charcoal, no longer burned, but glowed, a deep and steady luminescence that seemed to emanate from their very soul. It was a bed of embers, a landscape of quiet, internal fire that pulsed with a slow, and gentle, and rhythmic life. The quality of the light in the room had changed completely. It was no longer a bright, flickering light that made the shadows dance. It was a deep, and soft, and constant crimson glow, the color of a setting sun seen through a veil of thin clouds. This gentle, ruddy light did not seek to illuminate, but to soothe. It did not reveal the details of the room, but softened them, blurring their edges, melting them into a single, unified tapestry of warmth and shadow. The shadows themselves had deepened, had grown from lively, fleeting dancers into still, quiet pools of profound and velvety darkness. The room, which had felt cozy and intimate before, now felt vast, and ancient, and deeply, deeply asleep. The world seemed to have contracted to this one, single point of quiet, pulsing light, and the profound, and watchful, and silent darkness that surrounded it. The soundscape too had undergone a final subtle transformation. The cheerful, companionable crackle and pop of the burning logs had fallen silent. The soft, sibilant hiss of the fire's breath was gone. In its place was a silence that was almost absolute, a quiet so deep and so heavy it felt like a physical presence, a weight in the air. It was a silence that was no longer punctuated by any sound from within the cottage. The only sound that remained was the low, distant, and almost subliminal murmur of the wind, a sound that now seemed to come from another world entirely. The silence within the cottage was so complete that it seemed to absorb all other sounds, to drink them in, leaving only its own profound and undisturbed essence. It was the sound of the world holding its breath. It was the sound of a house at rest, a quiet, instinctual pull. The body's final and undeniable summons to its own repose began to make itself known. The day was over. The journey was complete. The rituals were fulfilled. There was nothing left to do but to surrender to the deep and waiting peace of the night. With a final, lingering look at the beautiful, breathing bed of embers, I turned. The movement was slow, a reluctant pivot away from the cottage's warm and glowing heart. As I turned, the darkness of the room rose up to meet me, a soft and welcoming embrace. My eyes, accustomed to the gentle glow of the hearth, could at first see very little, only the vague, dark shapes of the furniture, sleeping shadows in a sea of deeper shadow. My other senses, however, came alive, guiding me through the familiar and now invisible landscape of the room. I could feel the change in the air on my skin, the slight coolness that signaled my distance from the fire. I could smell the clean, dry scent of old wood and beeswax that permeated the very atmosphere of the house. My feet, bare in their soft woolen socks, moved with a preternatural quietness over the wide, smooth floorboards. They seemed to know the path instinctively, guiding me through the darkness with a gentle, unerring confidence. I passed the great, silent wall of books, a sleeping army of stories and dreams. I passed the armchair, a dark and comfortable ghost, the folded blanket a soft, square shadow on its back. My destination was a dark opening in the far wall, an aperture that I knew led to a small, winding staircase, the passage from the cottage's public heart to its private sleeping soul. As I approached, a new and subtle draught of air, cooler and stiller than the air in the main room, flowed down to greet me, a gentle, invisible river carrying the scent of clean linen and the faintest, almost imaginary hint of dried lavender. It was the scent of sleep, the perfume of rest, a quiet and irresistible invitation. My hand found the rough, cool texture of the plaster wall, and then the smooth, worn wood of the stairwell's opening. I stepped through, and the world changed once more. The faint, residual glow of the embers was now behind me, and I was in a space of near-perfect darkness. The staircase was a narrow, spiraling tunnel into the soft, black void. My hand found the banister, a simple, thick rope of a banister, its fibers worn smooth and soft by the passage of countless hands. My foot found the first step. The wood was cool and solid beneath my socked foot, and it greeted my weight with a soft, low, and deeply resonant groan. It was not the sharp, alarming creak of a house in disrepair, but the gentle, sleepy sigh of a house that was old, and comfortable, and deeply settled in its own bones. It was a sound of welcome, a quiet and musical acknowledgement of my passage. Slowly, carefully, I began to ascend. Each step was a mindful and deliberate act, a slow and rhythmic journey upwards into the quiet heart of the night. With each step, the air grew a little cooler, a little stiller. The faint, lingering scent of wood smoke from the main room faded completely, replaced by that clean, calming scent of lavender and linen. I was moving from one world into another, from the warm, living communal space of the hearth to the cool, quiet, solitary space of the sleeping loft. My hands slid along the soft, fibrous rope. My feet measured out the slow, steady rhythm on the gently groaning steps. The ascent was short, perhaps only a dozen steps in all, but it felt like a significant and sacred journey, the final, necessary pilgrimage to the sanctuary of sleep. I reached the top, and the space that opened up before me was a small and perfect haven. A cozy nest tucked directly under the deep, sloping eaves of the thatched roof. There was no true ceiling, only the dark ancient timbers of the roof structure itself, a complex and beautiful web of beams and rafters that disappeared into the deep, impenetrable shadows above. The only furniture was a simple, low bed frame, made of the same dark, honest wood as everything else in the cottage. It was dressed in a cloud of pale white, the sheets and the quilt, a soft, ghostly presence in the profound and gentle darkness. The air up here was cool, but not cold, and it was possessed of a stillness so complete, it felt as though it had not been disturbed in 100 years. This was the quietest, most secluded, most peaceful corner of a house that was already a bastion of peace. It was the sanctum sanctorum of tranquility. I moved towards the bed, a silent, drifting shape in the darkness. My hands reached out and found the edge of a thick, heavy quilt that was folded neatly at the foot of the bed. The texture was rough and nubby, a simple hand-loomed textile that promised a substantial and comforting weight. I pulled it back, the heavy fabric unfolding with a soft, whispering sigh. Beneath it, the top sheet was a plane of impossible smoothness. I peeled it back as well, the fabric rustling with a crisp, clean, and incredibly inviting sound. I sat on the edge of the bed, and the mattress yielded with a soft, deep, and welcoming compression. For a moment, I just sat there, in the cool, silent darkness, on the edge of the final surrender, savoring the last, delicious moments of anticipation. Then, I swung my legs up and slid my body between the sheets. The sensation was a shock, a gasp-inducing and utterly, wonderfully, breathtakingly pleasant shock. The linen was not just cool, it was cold, with the deep, clean, and almost shocking cold of river stones. It was a sudden and complete immersion in a fresh, clean, and life-giving element. My skin, which had been warmed all evening by the fire and the blanket, came alive with 1,000 tiny points of sensation. It was a feeling that was intensely clarifying, a feeling that washed away the last, lingering vestiges of thought, the last, faint echoes of the day. It was a baptism of coolness, a clean and perfect slate upon which the story of the night could now be written. This initial, shocking coolness did not last long. In a matter of moments, the alchemy of life began its quiet work. The heat of my own body began to seep into the crisp linen, and the fabric began to lose its sharp cold edge. The coolness did not vanish, but it was tamed, transformed from a shock into a gentle, soothing caress. The sheets were no longer a separate cold element, but were becoming a part of my own warm, living ecosystem. It was a beautiful and subtle transition, the gentle and gradual creation of a perfect, temperate nest. Then, with a final, deliberate movement, I reached down and took hold of the edge of the heavy quilt. I pulled it up, slowly, over my body. The sensation of its weight settling over me was the final, perfect, and most profound comfort of the night. It was not an oppressive weight, but a grounding one, a firm, and gentle, and deeply reassuring pressure that seemed to anchor my very soul to the bed. It was the feeling of being held, of being protected, of being tucked safely into the very heart of the cottage's deep and unwavering peace. With my body now, perfectly still, perfectly warm, and perfectly held, my eyes, which had grown accustomed to the deep darkness, opened for one last, sleepy observation. From my low vantage point on the bed, I could not see the hearth downstairs, but I could see its ghost. On the low, sloping wooden ceiling just above my head, a faint and barely perceptible patch of light was pulsing. It was the last, faint and dying glow of the embers, projected up the stairwell and reflected on the dark, ancient wood above me. It was a light so soft it seemed more a memory of light than a light itself. It pulsed with a slow, and gentle, and deeply rhythmic beat. A soft, crimson blush that would warm for a moment, and then fade, and then warm again. It was the last, sleepy heartbeat of the cottage, a slow, and steady, and infinitely soothing rhythm. It was the house, breathing in, and breathing out, in perfect, silent harmony with my own slow and deep, and peaceful breaths. I watched this last, gentle light for a long, timeless moment. My thoughts all gone, my mind a still and silent pool. The pulsing glow was a silent lullaby, a final, visual mantra of peace. It slowed, and it softened, the intervals between its gentle pulses growing longer. The crimson glow growing fainter, and fainter, and fainter still. My eyelids, impossibly heavy, began to drift closed. The last thing I saw was a final, soft, and gentle blush of red on the dark wood above. A final, silent goodnight from the heart of the house. Then, my eyes closed, and the world dissolved into a soft, and warm, and perfect darkness. The last, lingering threads of consciousness began to unravel. I could feel the entire cottage sighing around me, a great, slow, and gentle exhalation of the day. It was settling its old bones, sinking with me into the deep, and the dark, and the dreamless well of the night. There was no longer a me and a cottage. There was only the silence, and the darkness, and a single, unified, and all-encompassing peace. And in the heart of that peace, I slept. Thank you for sharing this quiet moment with us. It is in these small, peaceful routines that we can find our calm. If this story brought you a little bit of comfort, a like and a subscription helps our bookshelf grow and reach others who might need a peaceful story tonight. We have another tale waiting for you very soon. Until then, sleep well.